The topic of today is loops, which is not exactly API. It's a little bit more PHP than API. Um, but before I jumped into that, I just wanted to kind of touch on something very quickly, which is, I've gotten a lot of feedback over the last couple of weeks that we've been doing these webinars, and that has been awesome because it's really helped me figure out what's the best way to present this material. And I've been very appreciative of it, and I've really tried to take it to heart and use it to iterate and do better at the way that we present this. One of the things that I've heard is it's really interesting. For some people, a number of people, they think that kind of the level that I'm doing these webinars at is just right. It's not too in depth. But not too basic. I'm sure there are some people for whom it's too basic. They're not probably not here. But there are definitely some number of people who, every time I do one of these webinars, they get a little overwhelmed by all the code. And so one of the things I don't think I've done as good a job of is just to make sure that you guys understand the intention of this series of webinars, which is not to teach you the code. Initially, I didn't give you the code. But then a bunch of people asked for it, and I thought, well, for those of you who have the confidence or the skill to take it and modify it and work with it, why not give it to you? But I think that caused some other people to feel like they were supposed to be able to do that, and that was never really the point. Um, so just to be clear, what the my objective is in this series of webinars, the Extending Infusionsoft with the API, it's to help you understand what is possible, what you can do, not how to do it. And we're going to get to the how. In fact, we're going to get to the how really soon. I'm going to tell you about that at the end of this class. But the reason I started with this is because when I was kind of starting to talk to people about learning the API, the answer I got so often was, I know I'm sort of supposed to know about the API, or I feel like I want to learn about it, but honestly, I don't know what I can do with it, and therefore learning it really hasn't become a priority. So I wanted to start out by helping you guys understand what doors open for you as a result of knowing the API, and then we could get into separately how you do that. Okay. Now that's not exactly the reason why I haven't included code today, but I do, want to make sure that we're making that distinction and we're not scaring people off. And I've got to do, a better job of that. So what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to be talking about loops. And again, loops are not specific to the API. In fact, they are specific to programming. Any programming language, doesn't matter whether it's PHP or any language that you're going to use, you're going to have to know loops. They're really handy, they're really powerful, and in conjunction with the API, they help you do some really important things. And in some of the examples that people were working through on their own, this seemed to be one of the things that was kind of throwing people, and so that's why I chose it as a topic. So when you're working with the API, and by the way, let me make this bigger so that you guys can see it better. I got a lot of screen real estate. We might as well use it, right? I am recording, aren't I? Yes. Okay. Um, so when you're working with the API in Infusionsoft, a lot of times you'll be working with a single item, and obviously a single item would be a tag, a contact, an order, a product. And in fact, in some ways, I sort of feel like Infusionsoft is single object centric in a way. We tend to, it really tends to be centered around a contact. And so when we're working with one of those things, generally, especially with the API, but within the app as well, you're going to generally find that those single object activities that you do are triggered by an action. So someone takes an action. They fill out a web form. So a single person fills out a web form which triggers something to happen on their contact record, or they achieve some goal somehow in Campaign Builder. They click on a link, or they do whatever they're going to do. That's, again, a single person doing something, and therefore an action, which is what Campaign Builder is basically all about, happening on their individual um, record. An opportunity stage move would be another example, or they place an order would be another example of how we're working with single objects as the result of a triggered action. But this is definitely not always the case. And a lot of times when I'm looking at using the API, because I've hit some sort of a roadblock of something that I want to do and I can't do, a lot of times what I find is that it has to do with these multiple items, working with multiple items. Yes, you can do a search on multiple contacts, and you can do or orders or whatever and do mass updates. But I just, for whatever reason, it seems like a lot of the things that I need to do, I'm needing to do them with the API over groups of records. So when we're talking about groups, another way to think of that is lists of items. And in the programming world, we call a list of items an array. That's all it is, a list, right? So let's think of some things that we put in lists. We can have lists of orders, multiple orders. We can have all of a contact's tags. We can have all of our tags in our application, or all of the tags in a category. We can have all open opportunities. We can have all opportunities belonging to a salesperson. We can have a group of opportunities which are expected to close within a certain period of time, or which have a dollar figure over X, right? All these are going to sound familiar to you, obviously, because they're all the sorts of things that you might do a search on within Infusionsoft. In the API, we have an API call called query, DS query, data service query, where we can do some rudimentary querying of the Infusionsoft application. Well, I don't want to say anytime, the vast majority of the time when you do a query, the query is going to return not only multiple records, but oftentimes multiple fields. I mean, it is possible that it's only going to find one that matches your query. But a lot of times it's going to return bunches of records, right? Another example is the results of a saved search. Most people forget, but actually you can work with saved searches inside the API. You can call a saved search and then work with the results of that search using the API. I just kind of threw up this example. Everybody whose area code is 817, anything that is going to create a list, multiple items, is going to generally want to perform some sort of action on those items, right? So again, let's talk about, well, okay, what are the items? And I've listed them here. What are the actions, rather? Right. Well, one thing you might want to do is you just might want to list them. What are all those items in a report, or on, to print on a screen, or even to export to a file? You might want to clone them. In other words, duplicate them. You might want to delete them. You might want to add a tag. You might need to send an email. You might want to add them to a campaign or trigger a follow-up sequence. You might need to update a field. You might need to count the number of items. And we went through this when I did the project on RFM analysis, recency, frequency, monetary. Frequency is about creating counters and custom fields, and recording. How many times does someone purchase? How many times does someone watch a video? In that same webinar that we did when we were talking about monetary, for example. So sometimes, not only do you want to count of the number of times something has happened, sometimes you want totals of the, dollar totals, and lifetime value of a customer, average order size, or all of those things require acting on lists of items in order to take the action that you want. Okay, so hopefully at this point you guys are kind of understanding the distinction between working with lists and working with a single item, right? So, and by the way, if anytime you guys have questions, as always, go ahead and pop them in the question box, and I will look at them. And if it's convenient to address them right as you ask them, because that's the topic we're on, I will go ahead and do it. But I will also have plenty, hopefully, have plenty of time at the end to address any questions on anything, whether it's about this or anything else, API related. So, Peter, your question, and Infusionsoft does not provide these, right? Well, yes and no. Like there is some functionality around working with multiple items, right? The main one being the ability to kind of do mass updates. So you can search on a lot of these things, pull them up in a list, and then hit the action drop down and say update. How you can obviously add a tag to a lot of people. Some of them are not easily done within Infusionsoft. Certainly these counters, you can't. Adding a date to a custom field, you can't. Creating order totals and purchase totals and putting those in custom fields, you can't do that. And where the other place where you start to say, okay, now I've got to have the API, is when you combine what we're about to talk about, which is a loop, which cycles you through each one of these items in the list with some sort of conditional statement that says, if they have, so I'm going to go to record A, Peter, and if Peter's dog is black, then I want to update this field this way. Or, well, let's take a proper example, right? If Peter has ever attended one of my webinars, I want to update this field and send him this email or send him to this thank you page, what have you. But if Peter has not attended one of my webinars, I want to update the field differently somehow and send him a different email, right? So now we're talking about not updating everything in the list with the same value. And as soon as you get to that, Infusionsoft can't do that, right? At least not super easily, and not in every case. So those are the sorts of things where right away, then you start thinking API as a helper script to help you to do that. And I'm going to actually show you some examples of, or one example in particular here, where we run through the entire every contact in the database to do things, to do kind of those mass update sorts of things. So these are the sorts of actions that you might want to perform on these multiple lists of items. There are, of course, many more, many more, but this is just kind of get your brain working in that direction, right? Now, these are examples of performing things that you're going to perform on all of the items, right? Even if the value that you place, or what you place in the field might be different, but you're still performing it on every single item in the list. But another example, or another use case where what you're gonna do is you've got a whole list, but you only want to perform an action on a single thing in the list, or maybe 2 out of 5. So this would be things like, as you loop through everything in the list, right? As you and the human version of what I'm actually talking about, what a loop does, is, so let's just imagine that I'm sitting in my Infusionsoft application, and I've pulled up a list of contacts, and I want to know in interactive view, right? And I want to know, does well, what's this one? Does a contact in a list have this tag? So I go to the first one, and I click on the tags, little tags icon. I look to see if it does, and if it does, and I need to do something like update a field, I do that. And then I go to the next one and I check, does it have a tag? If it does, I update it. If it doesn't, I go to the next one. What I am describing there in human terms is a loop, right? I am looping. I go through, I perform, I check, I update. If there's no action required, I go to the next one. I check, I update. If no action is required or I've finished, I go to the next one. That's like the human version of a loop, right? So here, does a contact in a list of contacts have this tag, for example? Does a contact in a list of contacts, um, uh, did they order a specific product on a multi-product order? What's the value in a specific field in a gravity form? I might not have that one to show you today, but the reason I wrote that is because I literally just finished a project over the weekend where we created this really fairly complex form that has all kinds of conditional statements and directions. I love gravity forms, by the way, which is a WordPress plugin. So if you don't work with WordPress, you might not know what it is, but you can create amazing forms and surveys and all kinds of crazy things, and then move the results from the gravity form to Infusionsoft as soon as it submits, right? So there were a bunch of stuff that I wanted to collect, but I didn't necessarily want to store in Infusionsoft. So I basically, in that case, looped through the results of the form, and every time I got to one of the fields that I wanted, right, I stored it and then wrote it to Infusionsoft. So again, sometimes it's about going through the list and only taking action on specific items within the list. Okay. Now, regardless of what we're talking about there, you're going to use a loop for that. Barb, can you launch automation off of Gravity Forms? Well, with the API, you certainly can. Using the API, you can do anything, right? That's the beauty of the API. Whenever someone says, what can I do with the API, the answer is anything. If you can dream it, you can do it, subject to the limitations of your own knowledge, but you can basically do anything. So with Gravity Forms, it's super, super easy because all you're doing is, and this will make sense to everybody on this call who uses Infusionsoft, just like an Infusionsoft web form, a Gravity Form has a thank you page. And you can specify which thank you page you want it to be. Well, that thank you page can be a script as well as easily as it can be an actual page, and that script then takes the data and does whatever you want with it in Infusionsoft. Now, that's the easy way. There are more complex ways as well that are based on hooks and things that you trigger off the submit button. But that in fact, I'll try to grab that when we get to the different examples I'm going to show you, and I'll just show you kind of how that works. But the answer is yes, absolutely. That's the beauty of the API. Suddenly you're not limited. If you don't know the API and you can't get Gravity Forms to work the way that you want to, then now I can't use Gravity Forms. But really, Gravity Forms might be the best and simplest way and fastest way and most cost-effective way to get this done for my client, because I don't have to do all these kludgy workarounds. And if you've got a little bit of API, and that's what we're also going to talk about after this, the 80/20 programming, then you can start to take advantage of all of those sorts of things. So, again, all of these use cases that I've just gone through, and more than I can possibly begin to think of beyond that, are all cases where you're going to use loops. And a loop does just what it says. It says, for each item, perform an action. And that action, in this case, is some code. So for each item, perform some code, and then keep doing that until some criteria is met. Now, there's three kinds of criteria, right? One is that when a condition is met, when as long as A is, or as soon as A equals B, stop. Or as long as A is greater than B, keep going until that's no longer true, or what have you. So a condition, and this is about as far into loops, the code of loops, as we're going to go today, so that we don't scare anyone off. But by the way, we're going to do all these loops in my new PHP class that I'm going to tell you about, that starts on Saturday. Many of you are already signed up for, by the way. But and if not, I'll tell you how you can. It's free. But and we'll go through loops in great detail with examples and homework assignments and so forth. But so anytime you're using a condition like that and saying, do this until this condition is met, that's something called a while loop. It's a generalization. Now, there's another type of loop called a for loop. And in for loops, you're going to do it until there are no more items. If there's one item, it'll loop once. If there are 50 items, it'll loop 50 times. And it'll just keep going until it runs out of items. That's called a for loop. And a while loop is when you know specifically what's going to end it. And a for loop, you don't. One time it could end after one because there's only one item. The next time it could have 1,000 items. When you have an indefinite number of items, that's when we're going to use a for loop. And then there's something called an infinite loop, which is bad. And that's when you intended for it to stop when a condition is met, but you wrote it in such a way that the condition never got met, and then you're going to have something that's called an infinite loop, and it's just going to run forever and ever and ever and ever and ever, which is not what we want. But anyway, so those are the two kinds of loops that we tend to work with: while loops and for loops, and there's some variations on them, but that's basically it. It's really, really simple. So when we have loops and we know a little bit of API, let's look at specifically what sorts of things then that we can do really, more specifically with that. So I'm going to move this over here, get this out of the way, and I'm going to drag over my code editor. Give me just a second here, you guys, because I'm going to try to find that Gravity Forms one for you. Just it's actually on a different server, so just give me a quick second. It's this server. Go. Bear with me. Gravity Forms 2IS. Yes. Okay. So we'll do that one. We should have time to do that. All right. So this is oops, get over there. Okay, so let's look at some of these. So as you can see in the handout, one of my comments was that the first time I ever used a loop, I've referred to this before, that the first time I ever used a loop was in this script, which is cloning an opportunity. And this was also, as I told you guys in a previous webinar, the first script I ever got paid for. And the reason I did this is I just so you know, I don't write a lot of client scripts, the sorts of things that they would use ongoing. I might write like helper scripts to help me do things within a client app, but I don't tend to write their scripts. I have programmers that work for me. I have 3 of them, and they do those things. But in this particular case, the programmers were all busy. We were behind. This client was getting anxious because we had promised them the script and we didn't get it done. And I thought to myself, you know what? I bet I could write that. Now, it took me forever. It took me like 3 days to write the script. And I'm sure some of you can relate to that. I know Laura, if you're on the call, you've been kind of struggling with the little script that you're working on, and don't feel bad about that, because trust me, like that's kind of part of the process. This took me forever, right? But it was the first one I did, and I did it, and I learned a lot when I did it, and had to figure out a lot, and then once I got it done, it gave me a great deal of confidence that, hey, I can actually do some things with this API thing. And so I got into it and I realized, heck, I had to use a loop. So I've looked it up and I figured it out, and I use a loop. So just so you know what this, again, for those of you who weren't on that call, what this script does is my client, it's kind of a strange scenario. They do seminars, live seminars, and they sell those seminars to really big companies. And so the way they start out is they in their sales processes, they create a single opportunity. But then, because there's, I don't know, multiple pieces to this, what they want to do then is they want to basically clone that opportunity into 2 to 50 exact copies of it. Which is kind of weird. But so Infusionsoft, you can't clone an opportunity, right? So that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to be able to clone them. They wanted to be able to say, this opportunity, this is how many times I want to clone it, hit a button, and presto, the entire opportunity was there X number of times. So that's what this does. And you can see this opportunity ID, that's telling, I promised I wouldn't get into code, but basically that's just saying what's the ID of the opportunity we're going to clone and how many times are we going to clone it. And they put that in a little form. and then it does it. But the point being, I'm not going to go through all that. The point being this, right? So here's the first. Remember that I told you that there are either for loops or while loops, right? Well, in this case, we actually have two for loops here. So the first one is this first loop says, okay, we're going to, depending on if they said, clone it once, we will clone it once. If they said clone it 50 times, we will loop through and we will do this code 50 times, right? Each time creating one clone. Okay, so this is a for loop because we know that we're going to do this until we have no more items, or until we get to whatever the number of clones is. And every time we do this. So this is the loop that creates the clones, but within that, I want you to notice there's another for loop. This one's a little bit different. This one says for each. Slightly different variation on this, but what that's doing is it's saying, okay, every time I clone the opportunity, I got to go out and grab the products that are on that, associated with that opportunity, and add them to the opportunity. And because there, again, can be multiple products on an opportunity, not just one, I have to use a loop. Okay, again, so that's the key. Multiple opportunities create a loop, and then the fact that in each opportunity there can be multiple products means that we're going to use another loop. So it's a loop inside of a loop. So I go to the first clone, I get here, I go to the first product. Oh, there's another product. Second, oh, there's the third product. Okay, no more products. Go to the bottom, start again. Second clone. Boop. First product. Second product. No more products. Okay, third clone. You guys get that? So again, code aside, the idea is when you have multiples of something, then that should tell you in your head logic loop. Okay, loop. So that's one example. That's the first one that I ever did. Now here's another example. This one is purchase total. I actually gave you this code in one of the RFM webinar where we talked about recency, frequency, monetary, because what this script is doing is adding up the total purchases of a contact. Okay, total purchases. So again, because total purchases means more than one, right? We create, and we don't know how many. One person may have purchased one time, another person may have purchased hundreds of times. We're talking about a loop, a for loop in this case. Okay, so here's your loop. There's only one in this case, and by the way, just loops go from bracket to bracket. So for loop, where all it does is loop through all the purchases, because I've already queried them. A lot of times you will, like I said, you will use a loop in conjunction with a query of the Infusionsoft, which is up here where I pulled all the invoices, and then loop through it. Every time I loop through, I add the value to the previous total. Loop, 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 loop till I'm out, and then whatever I end up with at the end, that's my total. Right? So there's a case of a loop that we use to create totals. We also used a loop for sending you the reminder email that you got today, which ended up being a 30-minute reminder, not a 1-hour reminder, but nonetheless. And the reason or the way that happened is, again, I took you guys through this in the last webinar, but let me see if I can pull this up really quick. So if you look in the database, if this is going to connect, I'm taking up all the bandwidth anyway, so we won't do that. Kill, go away. Oh, there it goes. Okay. So if you look in the reminder database here that I have, these are all your email addresses. These are all the people who are signed up for this webinar. And so it loops through every single one of these one at a time. Says send an email. Is send less great is send less than now, and have I, these have all been marked now, but and is sent blank. Yep, send him an email. Yep, send him an email. Yep, send him an email. And so that's just a loop, and so you can find it right here. Right here it is again. Oh no, wrong one. Sorry. webinar. Here we go. Query reminders here, while. So this is a while loop right here. Okay, and it says that we're just going to loop through everything in the query, and we're going to send you the email. That's it. Okay. So there's a while loop for that. And then, because again, while loops are until a condition is no longer met. So that's an example of something that you can do there, or why you would use a while a loop. Oh, so this is an interesting one. Do while through records. So this one, I actually didn't write this one. At one point, those of you who know Robert Calisi, he did a lot of work for me. And when we first started with just a huge client that I have, he wrote this script. Now I've since kind of modified it and now actually gutted it so that I have it as a template that I can use. But he wrote it originally, and which is why it kind of looks a little bit different than my boilerplate. If you've seen my boilerplate, this is a little more programmer-y than my version. But anyway, so here's what this one does. This is a loop. It's a while loop. Got a different format. It's do while. The while is down here. But again, it's the same thing. It's a while loop. There are variations in for and while for each do while. And so what it does is this goes to Infusionsoft. It queries every single person in the database, and this was big. I mean, this is big. We have like 30,000 people in there, and it's looking for everybody who has tag ID of 339. Now, what we did is this was actually, we wrote this as a result of a problem with the import. You can imagine importing 30,000 records if you've done that not all of them are going to work out exactly right, and especially because we had companies, and the company thing was kind of squirrely, and it wasn't always hooking together with the contact correctly the way we wanted it to. And so what we had in our process was, in the import, if that didn't work exactly right, we tag them with what I'll call a problem tag, which said this import didn't go the way that we wanted it to. There's something that you need to do as a result of it. And so it gave, and one of those problem tags was 339. So at the end of this process, then what we did is we wrote a little workaround to fix the thing that wasn't working right. And that used to go right in here where it says action to be performed, goes here. I've taken it out since, and then now I'd put my own in here. But so what we would do is then we would just go to the database, we'd do a query, find everybody in the entire database who has 339, meaning it's a problem tag, and then loop through every single one of them, loop until, right, if count is greater than 0. And then, by the way, here's another loop inside that for each. Boom, loop, 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 fix, 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 fix. And this thing used to take, a long time to run, a long, 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 long time. And what it's doing as it runs is it's printing right here, echo contact ID, right? Their ID number and their first name, just so that I knew it was running. Run, 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 run. I used to sit and run for hours printing all these names down the screen while it was fixing all of these things. But to do that manually, totally not, well, we could have, but it would have cost the client tons of money, way, way, way more than to have Robert actually just write this little fix script, okay? And I now use this template all the time to do similar things when I need to just loop through all the records and just do something, right? That isn't something that you could do with the mass update. So this is almost like my version of update in the application, if that makes sense to everybody. Okay. Any questions on any of this so far? Are you guys kind of getting a sense of loops and what they do and why you use them and what's possible with them? Yeah, good. Excellent. Um, so here's some other things, and I was going to show you the gravity forms thing. Just real quick. Let me see. Hang on. Here. Okay. So, um, this is gravity.is. And so what, again, we have a form, a gravity form that people are filling out. This is a survey is what this is actually. Uh-oh, incoming phone call. Sorry about that. Not taking you. I don't know if you guys can hear that. Oh, it's ringing in my ear. Oh, quiet. Hang on. Sorry, you guys. Ignore. There. Okay. So this is a survey, gravity form. The reason we did the survey in gravity form is because the survey it had conditional branching in it. In theory, you could have done this same thing in SurveyMonkey or something, but gravity forms are just so easy to get from here to Infusionsoft. Is the reason we did it that way. So so here's the relevant part. You can just ignore all that stuff up there. But here's the relevant part right here, which is a for each. So what this is saying is this isn't about multiple surveys because this was actually triggered as the thank you page on each survey. So it's dealing with a single survey, but where the multiple comes in is the multiple answers, right? So in order to get the answers from the gravity form to Infusionsoft, I have to loop through and with each one decide what do I want to do as a result of that answer. So here's our loop for each result. We're going to loop through and say, okay, now this is a switch statement. This is also something, by the way, that we are going to cover in the introduction to PHP class that I'm about to tell you about, because this is actually a more efficient. What this really is a big if statement. If this, then this, if this, then this, if this, then this, but it keeps you from having to write it out in longhand. It's called a switch statement. But anyway, so in these cases, case 5, case 6, this is how Gravity Forms labels their fields. So each one of these fields are this is a field. So and these 4.2, 4.3, these are radio buttons actually, or checkboxes rather. So this is saying in this case that they checked and said they're a Polo Club owner, they're a Polo player, they're a Polo player female, they're a Polo player junior, etc. And so as I loop through, I say, okay, if this is case 5, meaning this is the answer that is in the field labeled 5, then I'm going to write that to a custom field. If it's the answer in 6, I'm going to write that to a custom field. If they checked 4.2, I'm going to tag them as being a Polo Club owner. If they checked 4.3, I'm going to tag them as something else. Tag, 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 tag. And then, finally down here at the bottom, if they said they use Facebook, I'm going to put their Facebook in a custom field as well or whatever. Okay. So again, so I'm point being looping again through the answers and doing something with those answers, which at the end get written to Infusionsoft in a DS update right here. Okay, so that's how we use the loop in a gravity form with the survey answers. Okay, so again, multiples, multiple, multiple, multiple. That's the key takeaway. If you need to do things with multiples, you're gonna have to use the loop. Okay, and Infusionsoft doesn't do those so well. All right, so the question is, what other sorts of things besides these ones that I've shown you can you use a loop for? Well, so here's just some other thoughts on that that I don't have specific examples of, but a big one which comes to mind because this is a question that we get all the time: custom reporting, right? I mean, this is to me one of the big shortcomings of Infusionsoft, especially coming from the Salesforce world, where I can create any kind of custom report under the sun with their report builder. The lack of that ability in Infusionsoft is very limiting to me. But by using loops and API, I can write any kind of report that I want. So custom reports is an example of things that you can do. Syncing data from one place to another is another example. So if you think about either the script I just showed you, which was the fix that looped through all the contacts to find the problem tag, or even the gravity form example that I just showed you, you can kind of imagine that, where instead of, and by the way, we do this again for that same client, we actually sync our Infusionsoft database to a MySQL database. We keep the two constantly in sync, and that's done through API scripts that run on a cron job and loop again are just looping through Infusionsoft every so often, looking for changes and writing them out to the MySQL database. So if you imagine, instead of fixing something, that instead in that looping process it wrote it out to someplace else, that would be an example of how you might use that. Um, um, and then, of course, mass updates would be the other example. Same kind of idea, where again, you loop through everything, and when something needs to be updated because it meets certain criteria, then you update it. So these are just a couple of examples, or well, a few, and I think they're pretty representative of a lot of the things that you can do with the API by looping. So, but I want to challenge you guys to think a little bit, if there's anything in your applications or in the things that you do in your businesses, for those of you who run businesses, and or for those of you who work for other people or consult, where do you see roadblocks that you've been unable to get past, that you might be able to use something like this to solve? Any ideas? Anyone want to share some ideas that if you've had like an aha while I've been talking and thought, oh, maybe I could do this, or want to know if you could do this, then why don't you throw them up in the questions, and so that we can share them. Um, so Peter says reporting. So like, what kind of reports? What kind of reports do you guys do that you can't get out of Infusionsoft right now? Or is it kind of, well, I don't know, because I never bothered to think about it because I couldn't do it, but I know I would like to. Anybody? Anybody want to share what they're thinking about, what they could do with this? Let me ask you another question. Is it helpful to kind of get a what's possible overview? I mean, yeah, okay, okay. Sales numbers, leads. By the way, um, dashboards like immediately come to mind, which is again something that we can't really well, let me take that back. We do have we have the saved reports, obviously. So we can do some dashboarding, right? But if you want to get to like what I think of when I think of dashboards, just some of the fancy stuff with graphs and things like that, then you can't do that. But you definitely can when you want to use the API. I know at one point, Jordan, I think way back when, did like a mastermind. I think it was on like Gecko Board or one of those that were, anyway, that you were exporting. Um, Deduping, absolutely. Yep. Yep. Someone on your list buys a product using a different email address. Absolutely. So, which Alistair brings up a really good point. So, I'm going to talk about 80/20 programming here in just a second. But one of the ways that I think about this programming in the API is as I'm about to talk about, is I am not aspiring personally to be a programmer, right? I don't consider myself one. I can write some code. You know, um, but I'm not a programmer. I don't make my living as a programmer. Um, but what I do want to do is I want to be more effective and I want to be more efficient. And a lot of times, um, I can't be that, right? There is a way to be more effective and more efficient. And one of the ways that, Alistair, you just kind of triggered me to talk about is by solving problems, catching problems before they occur, right? So a lot of times Infusionsoft gives me the ability to go back and fix a problem after it's occurred with the mass update or by doing searches and this and that. But the thing is, I don't want to do that, right? What I'd rather do is be able to say, I want to capitalize everybody's first name as they're going into the database rather than waiting until somebody is, gets an email that looks terrible, or I want to tag somebody who hasn't input a certain um, value, or doesn't have something in a field, so that I can go back and collect that information. Or I want, I mean, you could probably come up with a number of examples. I have loads of what I call process and fix tags that I apply, and those almost always, I mean, they can get, by the way, they, of course, you guys probably do this too. You probably do this in the campaign builder at times, but because we don't have the leg, unless you want to use legacy action sets, so you really can't do the conditions quite as well as we used to, right? So when you really want to get really sophisticated about catching things in advance and then taking care of them in advance, or at least flagging them so that you can go back and fix them, that is yet another really, really good use for just running whatever the data is through a helper script before it then goes to Infusionsoft, right? That's it. Okay, let's see what else. Uh, yes. So Stacy's saying that she wants to sync with an outside app. So yes, absolutely. I mean, we're syncing to a MySQL database, but it's the exact same thing. If you have a app that has an API, for example, um, or like, another example is the back and forth between Infusionsoft and GoToWebinar, right? That's a loop, you know, and things like that. Yeah, the Peter, actually, I didn't get to yours yet, but that's, you said the same thing, API to other APIs. I Ashley says I could use a loop to apply a different tag depending on a shortcode in the text of an inbound SMS. Exactly, exactly. Another thing that we use, and it's not necessarily a loop, actually, but it kind of is, depending on where it would be a loop is with products and orders, is to give people different thank you pages, for example, depending on what products they bought, and what the order total was. And you can, again, in most cases where you end up using this is when you can kind of do it with Infusionsoft, but not quite. Like, so, with uh, the different purchase actions and or promos and things, sometimes you can kind of get close, but really, if you want to do any sort of complex personal routing of upsells, thank you pages, etc., then you're going to have to use the API. All that crazy stuff, I can always say this, all that crazy stuff that Jermaine Griggs does, he has to do it with the API. In fact, the vast majority of um, people who are ultimate marketers are using this because the things that they're doing are more sophisticated than what the average person is doing. Tanya says, can you use the API to add custom fields to products, which can then be used in comparisons? Absolutely, you can. You betcha. And well, I don't want to, I won't expound on that. The answer is definitely yes, absolutely yes. And then in those comparisons, you can then take actions off of that. Do whatever you want. Tag them, redirect them, offer them an upsell, what have you. All kinds of things that you can do there. Okay, good. All right, those are some good examples or some good thoughts about things that you can do. I just hate it when I hear someone. Whenever I hear the word workaround, I cringe because when I hear workaround, I think, you know what, you shouldn't have had to work around. You shouldn't have had to like jump through hoops and make, opportunities do things that they're not supposed to do. Sometimes it's okay because they work really well, but sometimes they're just too kludgy and it's like, hey, we could just API, little script, helper scripts. Okay. All right. Well, so if I will take questions at the end, but if there's no more specific kind of questions about that, let me just jump for a second to two other things. I want to talk about 80/20 programming for a second, because this has really been the result of the feedback that I've been getting from doing this, and even just starting to, press the API issue out in the general Infusionsoft community. And we've had tons of feedback, which has been really, 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 really good and useful, because like I said to begin with, it really helps me figure out the best way to proceed forward with all of this. But one of the things that one of the kind of things that I had in my head, but I don't think I was really explicit about, was, what I'm trying to accomplish as a programmer, and or what I am trying to teach you, and how far we go with that. Now, you may go beyond this, but this is kind of my way, and so I've coined a phrase. Obviously 80/20 is not anything original, but this idea of 80/20 programming, I love the Pareto principle. I'm a big believer in 80/20 and I use it a lot. Um, and I think it absolutely positively applies to what we are trying to do here. So I've got two metaphors for you, or whatever these are. Two kind of ways to help you kind of understand what I'm thinking. One came from Cami, a fellow ICC in one of the Facebook groups. She talked about wanting the G chord progression. Well, I don't. This is guitar. I don't play guitar, but I loved what she said, which was, I guess that there are four chords in guitar that make up the vast majority of songs, and particularly the easy songs. And if you learn those, then they tend to teach those four chords first. And if you learn those four chords, then you've kind of got this framework where you can do lots of the easy things. And then if you want to learn a new song, then you just hang another chord or two on top of it, and you've got a song. As I understand it, if those of you who play guitar, if I just massacred that, I apologize. But that's basically the way I understand the G chord progression. Similar example in not current Greek, but in ancient Greek. Ancient Greek, there were only 100 words, which made up something like 70% of ancient Greek, right? And then the other however many bazillion words made up like 30%. So if you knew those 100 words, you could construct most sentences in ancient Greek. It's the same thing. The same thing is true in PHP. The same thing is true with the API. If I can learn and if I can teach you those 100 words or those four chords, that's the 20% of the effort that gets you 80% of the result. And for most of us, I think that's all we really want. We aren't, we aren't trying to become programmers. We just, as I said here in the document, we just want to get the simple things done quickly and cost effectively. And given 80/20, I believe that anyone can achieve that, and that you don't have to be necessarily bent of a programming mindset to make that happen. And I particularly believe that because somewhere later on, I said that programming is logic, not language. We all tend to get hung up, and I saw this a lot over the last couple of weeks. People get hung up in syntax and the best way to write things, and is this elegant or not? And the truth of the matter is, really, programming, regardless of the language that you use, PHP or Python or what have you, it's logic. It's the application of a basically linear flowchart process. And then there's a language that you hang on top of that you put on top of it that expresses that logic. That's all it is. Now, the thing is, I know you guys can do the logic. And the reason I know that is because you do Infusionsoft. The campaign builder is nothing but a flowchart logical process that you are thinking in. And so that's what a script is. It's actually campaign builder. If you sit down and you do like your little campaign builder diagram flowchart for your script, and then you just go find the language, the syntax, the PHP or API that does what you just drew, you're going to build scripts brilliantly and quickly. And I know you guys can all do that. So that's the idea of 80-20 programming, is that we're building scripts. We're building helper scripts, not Facebook. Facebook is of course built in PHP, but that's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to build massive plugins. We're not we're just building scripts. And so I have some rules now that I've kind of started to think about in my head, that says, for 80-20 programming, yep, it has to be secure, but it doesn't have to be perfect. For those of you who are ICCs, you might have been privy to an exchange that occurred between me and a programmer over some lengthy period of time. I, on the last call that we had, I did make a mistake. I absolutely did. I gave you guys some code that was not secure for linking to the MySQL. Robert Khaleesi pointed it out. I fixed it very quickly, and I appreciated very much that I learned. Hey, I didn't. My mistake. I did not do that. So, but really, the only place that we have that issue is when the main place we have that issue is when we're linking to external systems. As long as we're just doing all those other sorts of things that I've been talking about today, as soon as you start talking about MySQL databases and some other things, then you're opening yourself up, and we have to make sure those are right. And if I'm teaching you, that's my responsibility to make sure I teach that correctly. But it does not have to be perfect. It absolutely doesn't. And I'll tell you why I think that. First of all, we're learning. I'm learning. You're learning. We haven't been doing this for 25 years, right? So we didn't speak perfect English out of the womb. People allowed us to make grammar mistakes until we were 10 years old. I live in South Carolina. My street sign that I live on Squirrel Road, and my street sign is misspelled. So they still can't speak right here in South Carolina. So, the fact that you might not write the most elegant code, who cares? At least that's my view, right? You may feel differently. So I give myself permission to use deprecated code. For those of you who don't know what deprecated means, it's like using an old version of Windows. As they update PHP, they add things to it, and they take other things and they say we're not going to do it that way anymore. It's the same with HTML. It's the same with CSS. For those of you who write HTML and CSS, I guarantee you probably write tons of deprecated HTML and tons of deprecated CSS, which is no longer strictly the standard. And someday, years from now, it may stop working. But for our purposes, if it's easier and you understand it and you know how to do it and you don't want to go learn the new stuff, as long as it's secure, for me, I say that's okay. That's my view. I think it's okay if you don't use shorthand or if you have duplicate code. Is that right? Nope. Really, in theory, you should never have duplicate code. And I get that. And over time, as you do it and you get better at it, you won't. But the thing is, yeah, that takes overhead. It makes the script run slower, but you guys, we aren't writing 20 million lines of code. We're writing less than 100. So it runs so fast that the fact we have a little duplicate code, or it's not the most efficient way to write the code to begin with, is okay. Because if you start to get hung up on that, you'll get scared or you'll get frustrated and you'll go away and you'll stop. Right? I also think it's okay. Now this one's a little, like I'm on both sides of the fence, but I think it's okay if you don't have a lot of error handling. And for those of you who don't know what error handling is code that you put in that says, if this doesn't work, catch the error so that it dies gracefully. So that it doesn't, like, suddenly your user doesn't get this big ugly error message on their screen. And really, we really need to do that. And I do the bare minimum, But when I'm showing you guys scripts, I don't. And the reason I don't is it's really hard to read when you put error handling. It doesn't flow. And what the first step for to me of learning how to code is to be able to read it, then to be able to modify it, and then to be able to write it yourself. And if you've got a bunch of error handling in there, you can't read it. It breaks the whole thing up. So you got to have some. But again, these scripts, especially if you're using them yourself, if they die ugly, it's not the worst thing in the world. And if you test them properly, then, later down the road, then you start putting more error handling in. But I don't think it's a sin, even though some have said it is. So that's kind of my idea of what 80/20 programming is and why I think it's okay. Because again, it's not about, writing Facebook. It's about writing helper scripts. Um, so, I think my main message, because in addition to all of that, I've gotten quite a lot of people who, have expressed fear either of like getting started or making a mistake, or that people will laugh at them, or that people will attack them, or, don't, please don't be afraid, because you absolutely positively, I know you can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. I know you can. So I would give you these kinds of advice beyond what I've told you before. One is, in order to avoid kind of making a mistake that you regret, although I really don't think you're going to, unless you're just not really kind of thinking. But one is to, use a sandbox. Infusionsoft gives free sandbox accounts. I don't know if you guys knew that. They are fully functioning apps that have APIs that you can sign up for free. You can get them in the developer section of help, and help.infusionsoft.com/developer. Get a sandbox and use that API to practice in. If you are going to use your real application or client's application, make sure that you're doing tests and you're testing on like a test contact or small batches, and that you've made sure it works before you do it across. You implement it across the whole application. Make sure you don't get results that you didn't expect. Another is to make backups. I hate that Infusionsoft doesn't allow us to make backups of it. But certainly if you're working with a website or anything else, make a backup. Um, and then to code in chunks. And by code in chunks, I mean I generally never sit down and write or even try to run an entire script from beginning to end. Where is that thing? So what I will do, let's take a simple. I've shown you guys this before, right? But I will comment out everything, but like I'll comment out all of this, and I'll hard code it, and I'll run just this much, right? Make sure it works, and if it doesn't work, I'll fix that. And then I might, they all break in different places, but okay, now there's a query here, right? So I'm going to comment out all of this, and I'm just going to make sure that this part works. And then I'm going to, comment out all of this, and now I'm going to add this part. And I do that over and over and over and over again. I fix it as I go. And then when I get to the bottom, it should, in theory, all work. And that way I don't have to figure out what of all this mess is broken, right? So that's the other thing, is to code in chunks. Okay. But please don't let people scare you off. Some of those people have a vested interest in you not learning it. Others just, I don't know. It's not that hard, you guys. It really isn't. So we don't have to angst over it. And I'll help you in any way that I can. So okay, that's it on 80/20 programming. But that's my idea, right? So if someone says, "Oh, well, you didn't write that semantically," I'm going to say, "Yep, 80/20, 80/20. That's the deal." So with that in mind, the other thing that I'm doing is I'm starting a PHP class. And I'm starting it on Saturday, and I know many, many, many of you on this call are already in it. I see the names, the ones who attend all the time. Oops, because those are the only people that I sent the invitation to, are the people who attend this webinar on a regular basis. I may send it out to a few more, but we had really good response. So I'm not sure. I haven't decided. But the idea is this: there are some people who I promised you guys I was going to do a write your first script in 4 hours course, and I am still going to do that. That's an API course. However, I have had enough people tell me that they don't feel like they understand the PHP part well enough that they don't want to just copy and paste and not understand what they're doing, that they'd really like an introduction to PHP. So I'm going to hold off on the 4-hour Write Your First Script course and do a intro to PHP course first with the 80/20 principle in mind. It's going to be 8 sessions. I'm going to run it for 2 hours every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, beginning this coming Saturday. I know it's short notice. This is the syllabus, okay? What we're going to cover in each one of the sessions. And again, my objective is that by the end of this, you should have the 20% of PHP that you need to be able to go off and effectively now work with the API and write scripts and understand the scripts that I'm trying to teach you. Okay, so this is the 80/20 building block that is going to lead up to the 80/20 API. And I will record it. And of course, and I will, for those of you who can't make those dates or times, and I will also this is going to be like a follow along. We're going to code in this one. This is not what it can do, this is how to do it. Okay, so there'll be homework and or exercises for you to work through, make sure that you're comfortable with it and that you understand it and can do it, and then we'll move on. Okay, so if you want to register for that, if you're on this call and you did not get an email invitation to that and you want one, please email me, kim@kimsnyder.com, and I will send you one. I am going to send out an invitation to the people who are registered for this webinar but have never attended now, just to fill up a couple more seats, and then we'll just see how that goes and probably go with that. So again, that starts Saturday, 4:30 p.m. Eastern time, same as this. This seems to be work for all of you Kiwis and Aussies, and I know it's a little late for those of you in the UK, and Troy, you're just like, out of luck over there in Budapest. I apologize, but because you're only one in Budapest, you get the short end of the stick. But this time seems to work pretty well for everybody. Let's just get the most people in. Okay, so look, I'm not even over. Okay, let's see. So let's go do some questions. Peter, could you grab a dashboard theme from ThemeForest and connect an SQL database, then connect the API? Yes, you certainly could. Absolutely could do that. Now, again, when you start dealing with the SQL database, that's when there are some security issues. However, I did correct those. They're easy to correct. What I did, by the way, Robert gave you like the answer, which was in the for those of you who are in the Facebook learning group. Robert's answer for Raven was the deprecated version. Who cares? It's perfectly, it's just as safe. This is like the new fancy newfangled PDO thing that supposedly all the cool kids are using. This is like the newest thing. This is like CSS. No worries, Scott. Talk to you later. This is like the new CSS 5, HTML5, CSS3, whatever. So I'm starting to do some of the examples in this, but frankly, this is really ugly to read. It's hard to understand. I actually like the old MySQLi better. So it is secure the way that we've now revised these, but that would be the caveat. I'd say, yes, you absolutely can do it. Let's just make sure we do it in a way that's secure, right, before you just go putting that out into the world. Brian has given us thank you, Brian, the link. Hang on, I will post it here to the sandbox information. That is this. Oops. So awesome. So you can go get yourself a free sandbox. Scott had to go. Thank you, Ramona. Awesome. Let's see, Danielle. Well, that's okay. I will record it. I don't think it's going to be as good, Danielle, as when is doing it live, because obviously you don't have the ability to ask questions, but I was certainly more than happy to help you with them. And of course, I hope everybody really, really hope that you will go to the API learners group and post your code in there, and that we can all support one another and help one another and learn from he who teaches learns twice. That's part of the reason why I'm doing this, right? So, by helping figure out the problems of everybody else, you will actually figure them out for yourself as well. So, that would be the other thing, Danielle, is yeah, to sign up for the course and then just put the your questions there. Well, okay, let's see here. Good, good, awesome. You're welcome. All right, outside. Yeah. Ashley is asking about holding the app name and the password, the API key, in a file outside the public HTML directory. I actually asked about that early on. I will see if I can dig that up. Um, I've got some stuff that we're using where it's a little more. It's your API key is not quite as far out there, but I asked this in the forums actually, and I remember it might have been Justin back then, or maybe it was Michael. I don't remember. And basically, their answer was, truthfully, no matter what you do, your API key is still accessible to anybody who's smart enough to know how to go get it. You can kind of make the path longer for them to get to, but they still can, which is unfortunate. I know that Infusionsoft is working on OAuth, because that is the problem right now, is that our API keys are out there. And when you have someone's app name and API key, you basically have the keys to their front door. And I know they are working on OAuth, but I have not heard any like timeline for when it's going to be rolled out. Truthfully, until they roll out OAuth, it really isn't as secure as we would like it to be. But I will see if I can dig that up about the moving it outside the public HTML, because I know we've got it. I think I've got that somewhere. So that would probably be really helpful for everyone. Thanks for bringing that up. Okay, awesome. Looking forward to seeing you next get together for the cookbook. Troy, so cookbook. Peter has finished today, I think, or is in the process of finishing his first recipe, and it's really, really, really good. For those of you who are working on the cookbook with me, I haven't seen any other recipes, so I don't know where you guys are. If we need to have a get together, to maybe connect or move things forward, let me know. Um, and now the holidays, we can definitely do that. So you guys just let me know. Give me some feedback about like, oh, I haven't touched it. I meant to. Yeah, I'm done waiting on you, and we'll do whatever we need to do. All right, it looks like the questions are winding up. So if you guys don't have anything else, well, let's just say this. We'll just say, if you have questions, go ahead and post them either in the learning group, API Learners Group, or you can email me, kim@kimsnyder.com. And then we'll just go ahead and close up early for today. But you guys are awesome. I always enjoy spending time with you. You guys have taught me so much just by having to think through all of these issues and make things watertight. And I'm becoming better as a result of working with all of you guys. So I appreciate you very much. I hope you had a wonderful, wonderful holiday, and I'm going to cut it off there. Thanks, everybody.